excited to have a chance to chat with my friend and colleague and fellow artist, SUZIE Smith. But before we kind of get into a conversation, I wanted to also extend a thanks to local artist, filmmaker, painter Annie Kierans for a really beautiful text that was written in conversation with the work. We discussed the idea of not creating a didactic text for the work, which kind of goes along with a lot of the ideas anyway, not pinning the work down to kind of a singular piece of writing, but rather Annie took on the kind of creative task of writing a response that opened up different directions and windows from the show. So I wanted to read what I found a kind of interesting way to navigate through the text, and I'll just read the final lines of the 5 or 6 paragraphs, because I found that was an interesting way to kind of coalesce and find kind of a through line with the text in relation to my work here. So starting at the top, staying with the trouble, no clear beginning or end, endless changing fields in a state of suspension. Lulled by the circadian pendulum, just on the cusp of recognition, same material, shapes fresh and new, a multitude of windows bringing outside in, trying this, that, there, or maybe here. So thanks, Annie, for providing this kind of adjacent text to the show. Anyway, with that.
All right. Okay, so first of all, thanks, Emmy, for inviting me to do this Q&A, and also to Brianne and Sapphire for having me here as well. I feel like so often we can get really siloed in our own media, so it's really nice to be a printmaker here, talking to a painter, and just kind of opening that up. And in general, this show, it feels like the way you use modularity and transparency and opacity and layering, and these are all kind of like familiar things to me as a printmaker, so I like thinking about that as well. Try not to make too much noise with this. Okay. Okay, so starting off, just like entering the exhibition, first word, the title of the show, Perennial, makes me think of gardening. I love gardening a lot, so as opposed to annual plants that you plant every year, that you decide where they go, perennials come back every year and tend to grow and pop up in unexpected places and are growing under the surface, under the snow-covered area, and those are the kind of things that came to mind with that title. Deep root systems as well. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about your choice for this title.
Yeah, thanks. The title came kind of late and quickly and felt really right, but there are kind of, I think, multiple layers to that singular word. First of all, I was kind of thinking of this point in time in my practice, kind of settling into a very refreshed new moment of creating a lot of new work that I felt was a massive shift from some of my older work. So I was kind of starting in a very clear and kind of empty headspace, but what I kept noticing was the recurring ideas that came in the form of a shape, a motif, a piece of language, a historical painting, that always just kept kind of sprouting up. We're going to probably use a lot of garden plant metaphors now, but just kind of so that was the first kind of observation I had, was even though I was trying to make quite a drastic shift from previous work, it was a nice reminder that all these things I had been thinking about for years and years kept kind of popping up unexpectedly, and like you say, kind of popping up in different places or different ways. So that is something that I've come to understand kind of defines part of my practice. It's just watching out for the recurring shapes and motifs that start to kind of create a language of their own. I find, and whether, when I first use a flower shape or a dress shape or the motif of a window, I don't necessarily know if it will, I don't think that it will come back, but then years later it does, and I just kind of had this nice moment of wanting to acknowledge that more fully in this work. So that kind of was a starting kind of realization for that title. But then I also was thinking about painting as a kind of perennial idea, or like a perennial language, and painting's ability to kind of reemerge and be reinvented and kind of go through cycles of death and life, and painting as a kind of never-ending cyclical force, kind of visual language that we return to, or that I return to again and again. So that was kind of like two ways I was thinking about the word perennial. Within that cycling of painting too, this show kind of started to zero in on some tropes within painting discourse. So looking at windows and curtains and chairs and always the body as well, whether it becomes hidden or a bit abstracted, the representation of the body. So thinking of those kind of painterly tropes that don't ever quite leave us, but reemerge again and again. Yeah. So those are all the many perennial kind of layers in the work. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I always think of with perennials, it's like you're just kind of like splitting them and like cutting them back, as opposed to like planting and trying to get them to spread. It's like the opposite. So maybe it's like this, you're kind of like have all this work, and then you're kind of like trying to edit it down or
And when they do come back, they come back in like unexpected way. Like, I'm a new gardener, so that was also kind of on my mind. Was like all of this work was made in spring and summer, so I was thinking about growth cycles and how something comes back after such a long duration of what you think would be death, but it comes back with new life and new force and in unexpected ways. So I think about that a lot in just like my artistic practice. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks. Kind of maybe a bit in relation to that, thinking about removing painting from the stretcher. So often I feel like talking to other painters, when a painting comes off a stretcher, it's often the start of like a death, like where you're like, you can't store it, or you have to ship it somewhere, or you have to just, and it's kind of like, it goes into the garage and then it comes off the stretcher or something like that. But for you, it's almost the opposite, where it coming off of the frame, it's kind of got this new life, and it's like, it's the start of the project almost. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think early on, years ago, when I first started cutting into paintings, it was a bit of a marker of the death of that painting, because it was more about taking this excess of massive paintings I had that weren't going anywhere in the world, and it was kind of a violent act of cutting into them. So it did initially come from that kind of like the end of a painting, but the cutting into and then recycling of those surfaces, they became something new. So there was like that element of growth and renewal and of a life cycle. So the cutting into paintings definitely was first kind of a practical, like I have all this painted canvas, what can I do with it? Also shipping and transportation, like moving between residencies, working off the frame was really practical for just the transportability, and the paintings weren't as, they could be rolled and sometimes folded, and they weren't so precious. Now I've been working with paintings off the frame, they don't all come from paintings that I have deemed bad. They're now made specifically for the purpose of being draped and layered and loose, and so there's a different intention behind works from the last couple of years, where the draping is what I'm thinking about as I'm making these paintings. I also, a stretched painting also feels like a very untouchable object. And to me, this kind of the looseness and the movability of these paintings, it allows them to be touchable, and it allows them to have a kind of intimacy that like a stretched painting doesn't always have. Or for me, like maybe it's more my relationship with that painting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely the kind of like movability was like seems like a major part of the show. It feels like in some parts I see some like little magnets, but otherwise it feels draped. It's not like tacked in place. I'm sure you had some compositions, but it feels like the next time I see it, it would look totally different. And that kind of action or movability is highlighted in the videos too, where you're kind of like peeling away all the different layers or layering them up. So yeah, I don't know if you had anything in particular to talk about, just with kind of like your draw towards it, wanting it to be more movable.
Yeah, I guess, I think for a long time I've been kind of trying to find like a temporality within painting, trying to find an ability to bring like time and play into painting that I think can happen within a stretched painting. It can, but it wasn't happening in my paintings. And so I was like trying to figure out how to kind of solve that, or kind of like find that for myself and feel excited by a painting that wasn't fixed in place, or by a painting that didn't want to sit still. And so yeah, thinking about paintings, creating paintings that could forever be rearranged and had the potential to be recycled over and over again. That was an interesting point to reach a few years ago with the draped layered pieces. Just this idea that modularity, that like the kind of puzzle piece nature of the modular paintings could offer kind of a never-ending life cycle. Anyway, but then even with the draped paintings, I still was craving that movement and kind of trying to communicate the liveliness of them, and that happens in my studio. Like in my studio, I'm constantly throwing these fabrics around and tossing them and crumpling them and walking on them, and so that led me really recently to the video work as a way to kind of like extend that temporality and that idea of kind of this cycle, this never-ending cycle of play and movement and change. So yeah, then it kind of opened up the video as a tool.
Yeah, definitely the video, and even though like the way it's hung, it kind of like floats a little bit as people walk by it too. There's like a little bit of movement there. And kind of speaking of how you've hung it, I feel like I've seen quite a bit of a few of your shows, and then also like a lot of documentation of your work, and it feels like, is this the first time you've started to like connect the dowels where it becomes more architectural almost, or some sort of architectural intervention with the space? And if so, is there like kind of did you have a plan for why you hung them where they were in the space? Like, did you want to guide the viewer in a certain way?
Yeah, I had an image. I had my first imaginings of this show as like quadruple the amount of zigzags, like really, really path-like and maze-like, but then starting to spend time in the space and kind of lay out where things were. Anyway, I had to kind of reduce that vision a little bit, but my intention still was, moving. I guess there's just two pieces here that have like the zig and the zag, but that for me was kind of creating this the paintings were creating a new space. When they're hanging singularly on a single dowel, like this one here in the center, it's still very much kind of pictorial space for me. Like the rectilinear frame created through the flatness of the dowel and kind of the rectangular pieces, and also the shallowness of of the hanging. Like, it's for me very much a pictorial space. It's a painting. But then the moment the zigzag kind of came in, I thought this suddenly feels like a space, no longer pictorial space, a space for the body to kind of follow along and move along with the painting. So I was thinking more about how like the viewer would kind of traverse that pathway, and encourage a movement like around the back as well. So yeah, I guess I think in this openness of ace art, I was thinking more about how do we create pathways for the viewer to really feel like these are objects to like navigate fully around and not just look at as an image. Yeah.
Yeah, it's thinking how it controls where the viewer walks or how they see the videos, but then you were talking about how you liked how in some of the documentation, how you could see people's feet kind of still coming through, like there's still something kind of temporary about it, almost like a fort or something, or like a tent.
Totally.
Or
and I mean,
they're
purposefully hung kind of just above most people's eye level. And yeah, I do really like seeing people behind the pieces and the feet. You know, you can see people's feet and legs through the bottom, and but they're very much body sized. Like that was my intention, or has been for a while now, working at this scale. It's not kind of like grand museum scale of it's very body scaled, and so yeah, with the hanging and thinking about how the body navigates these pieces, the height and the spaces, we're very much thinking about the body peeking through.
Yeah.
And also, like, it's also nice to be in a gallery and have little places to be hidden, like as the visitor. Like, I like the idea of these as privacy screens that you can kind of hide behind and spend time with. But
then the little dog that's here sometimes just like walks like right through the middle.
Yeah, some good dog size holes, yeah.
Pretty good. Yeah, I wanted to ask you a bit about kind of surface and image. So it's not textile work, it's not sculpture, it's still really like paintings. Yeah. But I feel like there's like a little bit of wiggle room now that you're starting to use some like thinner materials, and maybe, I don't know if your process of painting changes, but now as opposed to the earlier work where it was a canvas where it would be like image on one side and you wouldn't see anything, now it permeates through and it kind of creates transparency. There's the front and the back, like both have images on it, and yeah, I was just wondering about I guess your relationship, let me see. Yeah, how does like the material, I guess, become a part of the work? I like starting that off with the tension between surface and image, because the material for me kind of highlights that tension. I think painting has always, a perennial problem of painting is that it is always caught in the in-between space between surface and image. And I've always really been fascinated by that with painting, and it persists in my work, but I was always trying to get at it, and I think I'm like maybe just starting to like get at it. It's just taken me a long time to kind of figure out how to deal with that material versus pictorial tension of painting surface and image. But yeah, the draped cutouts initially, like even when they were mostly made with gessoed stretched canvas that I would cut out and have oil on canvas, even then I still allowed the raw backside of the canvas to show, kind of, which was like, whoa, like the back of the painting is now visible. And so I was trying to get at that kind of back and front hierarchy, trying to kind of break that down and make the painting feel viewable from all sides. And anyway, but so yeah, the choice to then work with fabrics rather than gessoed canvas, you're right, it allows the image to permeate through the surface, which is practically just way easier to deal with, because suddenly I can extend
the image field so much in these because I'm not dealing with blank raw side of the canvas. You know, like suddenly the whole piece has pigment and image within it. So anyway, so it does allow like the scale to change, but then kind of following that practical move towards fabrics that could be soaked through, that also then led to me thinking, oh, these fabrics are also transparent. These fabrics are also movable and crunchable and foldable in a way that oil on canvas isn't. So I think it first started just as a practical solution, working on the unprimed fabrics, let's call them. But then that led into some of the video and pieces and and it takes away the preciousness and kind of value or something inherent to like oil on canvas, and also the delicacy of oil on canvas, because you can't fold and crumple those surfaces in the same way that I can, with the stained fabrics.
Yeah. Even in the videos where there's like some transparent video. I think it was this one where there's some transparency to the fabric, and I start to see you every once in a while in there, either like a shadow or like a hand coming in. But I feel like if it was just a canvas, I might not see you because you'd be hiding behind it.
Yeah, the transparency was an exciting discovery. It was that the video behind this pillar here on the back wall of the yellow curtain, or it's called the yellow curtain. That was the first time, just recently. These are all made from the summer, but that was the first time I was like, ooh, light through fabric. Suddenly, the transparency allows for color mixing. It allows for an abstraction to occur with the layering and kind of the when I place my body behind those fabrics, there's kind of an abstraction of the body. The transparency really ignited something. Actually, and it was like Lisa, my studio neighbor, who happened to have this like beautiful poplin fabric that was really transparent, but held the pigment really beautifully too. And so it was just like a set of happy accident discoveries that led to that play of transparency.
Kind of along the same lines of like embracing something unexpected with your piece over there, the one that you made in New York. What is it called again?
Holding patterns. The wind piece.
Yeah, like letting kind of the sun from the light in your studio and the wind kind of become part of the piece as well.
Yeah. That's the first video of these 5 videos that I made, and that was from the spring, and I was in a residency, so I was in a new studio and and I don't necessarily think of my practice as like site responsive, but I think most artists would agree it's inevitable that like your space influences and comes into your work. Anyway, but I arrived at that studio at the residency, and the wind coming in off the water into this big old warehouse building was so forceful that I felt like I had to respond to it. So again, that was like a moment of like, okay, what substrates am I going to paint on? I should paint on light, movable, blowable fabrics. So again, kind of like choosing the substrate in response to how they would behave in that environment. And that video is exciting for me because I really felt like I was just an observer, like I could just stand back and watch the wind do its thing, and I was like, wow, I don't have to do anything, but it was like I suddenly kind of felt intrigued by this idea of video where I could stand behind the camera and just kind of watch the painting evolve, obviously then stepping in to create an intervention as is happening in all of these, but the videos felt kind of freeing in that I felt like I was a little bit removed from the process. Anyway, I forget the question.
Oh.
I don't know, but the wind,
It was just
the
like
wind
pointed
piece.
at wind.
Yeah.
Sun,
Oh, the idea
yeah.
of the environment coming in. Well, from the wind piece, then I was like, oh, our studio building at 90 Annabella has these incredibly large windows. The sun comes streaming in the mornings when I'm never there, but I knew, I was like, I have to go in the morning to get the sun. And so that led to the curtain work, where I wanted the environment to kind of influence and orchestrate the painting taking shape kind of without so much of my hand.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were talking about these windows at 90 Annabella and how they're like a number of artists muse, like thinking Mark Neufeld or Craig Love, I think, was doing some that were the same size too. And
The gridded
Yeah.
panes are really important too.
Totally.
These large grids of light.
we've got different ones on Adelaide, but I feel like I recognize the Annabella ones in a different way.
Yeah,
Bit larger
distinct.
scale.
Yeah,
Excellent. Yeah, thinking about kind of found material, both kind of like imagery and then also the actual like materials that you're using to paint on in some cases. We had kind of talked when we met earlier about this kind of like cannibalizing and remaking of things. And then also thinking about kind of in your artist statement how you were talking about kind of using imagery that was reoccurring feminine coded motifs, hands, dresses, curtains, and floral still lifes. I was just wondering kind of what kind of found imagery and material interests you, and is it important for the viewer to pick up on some of these references? Like sometimes, I feel like that was a bit of a long question. So it's like sometimes you're referencing paintings, particular paintings, but in kind of like a looser way. And then also with materials, you're using like bed sheets and curtains, but I feel like you have rules about that of like what's, you know, what you would use and what you wouldn't use. So it's just kind of found things.
Yeah.
Is my question.
Well, so for many years, my painting practice has kind of taken on a routine of kind of plucking and cutting pieces from art historical references and rearranging them. I mean, collage is kind of the underlying language to that method, but rearranging, collaging, and creating something new from something that existed. So that's always kind of like an underpinning to my work. And so just like I mentioned at the start with the title Perennial, a lot of those like motifs and shapes, those are the things that I'm plucking from historical paintings, and they keep kind of recurring, and in each instance that they are used, they lose a little bit of their origin, they lose a little bit of their tie to the past or to that original reference. I've kind of tried to think of it for myself, like when you repeat a word too many times, it starts to feel really clumsy and strange and kind of abstract in your mouth, you know, when you like say something too many times and you're like, is that a word? That's how it feels when I repeat these shapes, and just, in that idea of cyclical growth, like they sprout up, I know where they came from, but they've really taken on something new, and I try to, or I kind of stumble into this space where they suddenly feel very much like my own and not appropriated from somewhere else. Anyway, but yeah, so I do borrow from particular painters, and I don't have a massive archive. I have this very kind of small rotating, you know, nested folders of really bad JPEGs, and I print them off on a crappy printer, and I cut, and there's just, and it's not like a massive thorough archival like database that I'm trying to create. It's more like shapes that have caught my attention, forms that have caught my attention over time, and for the most part revolve around representations of young women and girls throughout kind of a mid-20th century painting history. Like, it's very limited, you know, and I've always kind of tried to not set that as a rule for myself, but just think, why am I responding to this work and not that work? If there's an intuitive draw towards certain paintings, there's an intuitive draw towards certain artists, and a kind of drive to question and kind of problematize a lot of that imagery that I'm pulling from it because I find it problematic, you know. But then again, those shapes, sometimes I forget where they come from because I've used them so many times, and it's like a abstracted dress shape that the body has been left behind. It's just kind of a dress shape that remains, and I don't even know if you see it as a dress shape, but you know, they become something other, and something that for me kind of reaches an interesting place of no longer being tethered to a historical reference. So that's why I do bring up historical reference when I kind of describe my work, but it's not so direct as like painters who have really figured out a kind of like revisionist method to history. Like, I think I'm a little bit loosey-goosey compared to some ways other people use historical references.
And are a lot of imagery from like backgrounds, or is it foregrounds, or a mix?
A lot of, for many years I was collecting shapes of dresses and skirts, but always kind of leaving the body, so kind of looking at the spaces of surrounding a body. And then for this show, I did kind of like branch out a little. I was looking at like windows and curtains, kind of floral patterns from wallpapers and still life, and so, you know, kind of it all loosely revolves around a kind of a representation of whether it's like the domestic or direct representations of women's bodies. I mean, I think it all kind of revolves around some kind of connecting tissue that, but no, I don't really have set rules. You use the word rules. I don't really have set rules of how I pull these references.
Thinking about the body, we talked about this the other day when I met here. Just when I first saw these, I was thinking about the shape of the videos, or like of the portrait format as opposed to the landscape format as like an iPhone, because it felt that way. But you were saying that it's more like in relation to the body. And then when I see these installations, I'm thinking of them more as horizontal, but then you're like, actually, I have to paint them long though because they get draped over, and this kind of like back and forth between like portrait and horizontal. I don't know if you first have any thoughts about that, and then I have an actual question.
Okay, I'll answer quick instead of going on a long tangent again. I'll answer quick. It was a good question you asked the other day about the format of the screens. It just kind of felt natural for me to have 3 of these 5 monitors vertical, because that is kind of the natural orientation I go to with painting. I always work in a kind of tall, oblong way for the most part, and I've often thought about it because I want the structure of the painting to have a dialogue with my body, to also be in relation to the viewer's body, like something about that vertical orientation. I understand it more when I'm painting. And then it was funny you brought up the horizontal nature of these cutouts, but really cutouts, I call them cutouts kind of as a shorthand, but really the cutouts are all actually like really tall and very much oblong, because to drape them it has to, to get a 6-foot length, it has to actually be 12 feet long. So I do definitely think in this kind of long, stretched out way, but absolutely these are filmed with a phone. But I was thinking about that vertical kind of aspect ratio for sure in the way that we consume images in a kind of vertical scrolling format. It's been on my mind for a while. It's not really like, this work isn't about that at all, but that vertical format has been, I've been kind of ruminating about that. I think the next series of paintings I'm going to make will all be matching the aspect ratio of a screen, but at a larger scale.
Yeah, and I guess I was just curious to hear a bit more about your process for making the paintings, because they're not stretched. Are you working on the floor, or And if so, do you kind of go back and forth between draping it and putting it back, or is it really just like you're making the material and then you're collaging the material afterwards?
Yeah, well, so this show is quite a departure from previous bodies of work where all the pieces, all the physical pieces were made for the videos. So none of the draping and composing of the pieces happened until the end. So the fabrics and some oil on canvas, the variety of painted substrates were made all for the purpose of whatever video I was working on, and that was a real switch in how I was thinking. But yeah, I've kind of discovered a really playful process of working on the ground rather than working on the wall, soaking these large swaths of fabric in like buckets of paint and pigment, and like slopping them on the floor to dry, and painting on them wet or painting on them dry, like coming back the next day and seeing how they've dried. I don't know, the working on the floor with the raw fabrics opened up like a really crafty, playful, experimental zone in my studio. And the floor became like, a very activated space, for sure.
Probably again, a bit of letting go of control too, of like, if it's more wet paint, how it flows on the fabric.
Yeah, I was telling someone this the other day, where like sometimes you'd paint a figure on the wet fabric and you'd come back the next day and it'd be gone because the pigment would have dispersed so much in the soaking wet fabric. So it was just such a nice, I felt a lot of freedom with this body of work, a real kind of release of like the pressure that sometimes painting can create when you're working on a singular surface. I don't know, and that's just like, that's very personal, you know. But for me, this kind of opened up a real sense of like levity. Yeah.
And then one thing I just wanted to ask you, I feel like it's the one thing that I like can't quite figure out, is like you have all the kind of little paintings within the larger installations. So I'm just curious to hear you talk about it a bit more, because you talked about liking a certain like awkwardness that provided, and whether you see them as like windows or frames around them, or just kind of curious to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, they are really awkward, and my first thought with placing some of those little paintings there was that because all of the large draped fabrics were made for the videos, they were then suddenly like the props, and I was trying to kind of wrap my head around like painting as prop kind of being an object used to represent something other than what it is, but being kind of secondary to its representation. Anyways, I've kind of got in this whole headspace around painting as props, and these are kind of props in stasis, like in their storage form, you know, because they were made to be thrown around in these videos. Anyway, so then I thought, well, what if by attaching other paintings to them, they're not only props, they're also like support structures. They're also like framing devices of their own. They become something just like a little bit more than their kind of original use or original intended purpose as prop. So yeah, the small paintings are definitely strange little windows into a much more static, kind of coalesced little environment. But they are also in line with kind of, the small paintings are maybe a little bit more of a crystallized moment of the combining and cutting and collaging of source material that is happening just at a different scale elsewhere in the show.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much. Where are we at for time?
Oh, it's 2:50.
did you want to open it up to questions? I feel like we could go on, but it might be more interesting if you
Absolutely, yeah.
hear what some other people have to say too.
Totally. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise their hand. Our mic isn't wireless, so maybe project your voice a little bit more, but yeah.
Lisa?
I have to ask this question about feminism. So I'm thinking a lot about state paintings of Helen Frankenthaler, which I think she was the best of that whole group of men. So I'm wondering, in terms of your identity, if you're thinking about yourself as a feminist artist, and if you are, which I think you are, I know you are, what trajectory of feminism, where do you sort of place yourself right now with the work you're doing?
Thanks for the question, Lisa. Yeah, I think the way I've always engaged with painting has been kind of grounded in a kind of, yeah, a feminist kind of way of moving through the world. The way I approach painting is through the kind of apprehension and a little bit of distrust I have around painting as a medium because of its very male-dominated, macho, Eurocentric, androcentric history. Like painting is very fraught, and I think maybe a kind of feminist approach to that is to kind of it's just one way to kind of dig into that kind of prickly, uncomfortable territory. Like I think there's interesting methods, for example, if you're quoting from painting history and only referencing the work of women, like that, you know. But then I think sometimes, well, what am I doing where I'm like only purposefully referencing the work of men? You know, like but I think for me it's an idea of like digging into the discomfort of trying to address, even acknowledge, because I don't think I'm trying to seek answers necessarily, but acknowledge like how a love-hate relationship can exist with the medium of painting, with its history, with a particular painting in general. Like I quote a lot from the work of Balthus, and Balthus is a very problematic painter, very controversial work, representation of young girls primarily, and so I think a lot about like what does it mean to take those shapes, and again my interest in it is kind of making those shapes my own, a kind of reclaiming or something of those forms. But I also kind of rest within the tension of that, because there's like, when does it fall into perpetuation versus subversion? You were talking about subversion in your talk the other day. Like, so the interest is to subvert, you know, those narratives perhaps, but there's also this tricky tension of also perpetuating. And that for me is just like held within painting as a discourse. It's like a perpetuating of histories that are messy. And I tend to like that. And because I've always felt very uncomfortable about painting, but I don't want to stop painting. Anyway, so that's maybe a very long way of kind of answering, I don't know, a little bit about like my positioning within painting through a feminist lens, I guess. Yeah. That's great.
Hi. So I think it's really cool how every person's or every artist's art reflects their own life and their own personalities and their own kind of like way of viewing the world. And I was just thinking about this recently in relation to myself, and I was wondering for you, like, I know you're a very have these works that are so loose and so movable and so like changing and fluid, and I was just kind of wondering, like, these for you, do they feel like more of a kind of like a personal playfulness, like you kind of like looking within yourself and seeing like what you need to produce this art, or is it you more like kind of challenging what has already been made and kind of like responding to the world around you, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thanks, Sequoia. I think the desire to first cut into some large paintings and flop around that canvas in a different way, I think that was very personal, and it came from like a really inner need to kind of challenge my own assumptions about what I should be making, what a finished painting looks like, what is saleable, what is sustainable, you know, like so I think it was like a very much, a kind of personal challenge to myself and personal need to break out of some rigid ideas around kind of what my practice could look like. It was coming out of my MFA that, like, it was after grad school that I was like, wow, I'm angry, and I like cut up my paintings. It was like very personal. But yeah, this work does feel different than years ago when I first started doing that. This work also, I think, has come back. I think I've actually come back to a very personal place with this work, where I realized how I needed to find that. I used the word levity already, but I needed to find that like lightness in my practice to be able to create a lot and quickly and intuitively, like, and not feel a pressure to have it be resolved in a singular way. So these for me were like, I don't know, maybe there's an element of like, I'm kind of refusing to make a finished and resolved piece of work. So maybe there's like I don't know, is it a cop-out? I don't know, but for me it was like, it was very satisfying, where I was like, oh, I don't need, these aren't as good as they could be. But they're also not finished, and that for me was a very exciting place to land in recently. Especially like going to some residencies and kind of the like movement and making work quickly. It was like, oh, these offer so much more. I just felt so much more excited about not feeling like I needed to find resolution in my in a project. Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else? Luther?
Thank you for the talk, Amy. And I'm curious about, I have two questions. I'm curious about the role of performance in your work. If you think about it consciously, particularly with the video works, like your hands is kind of moving these surfaces around, and I'm wondering what you're thinking while you're doing that, what you're trying to show to the camera, and if you're thinking about the video as just like documentation for what you're doing, or if like the video is kind of you're thinking through the medium itself in some way. The other question is, it's escaping now. You can answer that.
Okay. So the second part of your question, I think because video is so new to me, I've been really trying to figure out, are these documentary, or are they moving paintings? Like, I think that those are two really different things. And because I started with the wind work and kind of moved to the curtain, and I think it started off for sure as a kind of documentation. Like I wanted the style of the video to feel documentary. The only the shift though is maybe these two videos closest to us, where the cropping and framing of the work changes, where the environment, the studio space, the install space is no longer really visible. So I do think these are starting to shift into a slightly different direction, where they become, they perform more as paintings for me and less as documentations of painting. But that has been a really tricky distinction just in the last many months that I've been trying to figure this out, and I think I'm still kind of working through that. But for me, like, these two videos feel really different than the videos where space and studio is framing the work. And then in terms of the body coming in, it's for sure there's performativity here, in that I am purposefully in each video in a slightly different way kind of inserting like my presence. In the chair piece, like my hands or anything don't ever come into the frame, but there's moments I like sit and squish down all the fabric. You don't see that happening, but you see like the fabric suddenly take on the kind of ghosty shape of a body. So anyway, so that insertion of my body for me was, I think, a little bit like an acknowledgement of how I really see my paintings as figurative paintings, even though they move so far away from that. But I always think about the body, even if the body is not present or not so overtly represented. And so I just kind of wanted my body to kind of be that ever-present manipulating, force in these videos. Yeah, because I think that's how I think of it in my paintings too. Like I'm thinking more of like my stretch paintings. Like they do feel figurative to me, so I kind of wanted to bring the figure in here in different ways.
The other question I had was about, you mentioned not wanting, I guess, like the description of the work be pinned down, or, and you use the word not resolved. And I'm curious if you can speak more about what about that is significant to the work, in terms of how we see it.
Yeah, I mean, the videos for me feel like the most, like they're more fixed and resolved and finished than the physical material pieces. But it was important to me that the loop of the video then felt kind of seamless, so that it did feel like a never-ending cycle, at least, where there wasn't a narrative arc where something becomes fit, where you reach some kind of solution in the video. Like, even though they are more kind of finished, I don't, like, finished is a strange word to use for it, but they're more contained as an artwork than these. But even still, I think the cyclical, never-ending, kind of hazy idea of beginning and end was important to me for the videos for that reason, to try to kind of, get at this feeling of like it's just this continual process of like never-ending rearranging, and it never gets to the right place. It just kind of dies out and starts again. So then in the draped works, I'm really excited by the idea that they don't have to be shown this way ever again, and that I can keep painting onto these surfaces and use them in the next video work I make and use them in a new composition. And so there's almost kind of like a sustainability to it, like where I just don't want to keep making new things. I want to, there's like a real practical kind of like I want to keep reusing what I have, but also then they hold interesting kind of histories within them as I keep like recycling those fabrics. And again, the video work is all new, but I imagine that kind of recycling of work will keep, like that will probably, I'm hoping, will inform like the next video pieces to come. Like it will be this kind of regurgitation each time of all these pieces being transformed over and over. I don't know if that really gets at the meat of your question, but okay.
And we don't have like, you have like a time, you don't say what the timestamp of the videos are.
I
right?
did give it
Okay.
time, like I do say the length of the video, but I say on loop. Like, I really wanted to make it obvious that it was a loop. Maybe they don't need a timestamp either. Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of like really new things to wrap my head around with screen-based moving image, like, yeah. But I'm very excited by the kind of feeling of being naive and being a beginner and kind of like sorting through a totally new language where where I can suddenly figure out something new about my practice and new about the work because I'm trying to speak a new language with it. So yeah, anyway. Thanks.
One thing I really enjoy about these video pieces is that, in comparison to some other pieces that I've seen in the past with other artists, I don't feel pressured to stick around for the whole loop. I'm happy to look at it and then walk away and come back and see that it is state. And so for me, they do function in a similar way to a painting that you can leave it and come back, and different from some other sort of ways that your art can exist. Can you comment a little bit on that relationship with yourself? Like, how do you think about the relationship to painting and the viewer's experience of it?
Yeah. There's definitely some slow moments in these videos where I think you kind of wonder if it's frozen or paused, you know? So I really liked the stillness of those moments in almost all the video work. Because, so it maybe goes back to one of my earliest notes about being an observer with the videos, like standing back and just kind of looking and watching what was happening with the wind, obviously, like I was just watching what the wind was doing. But even with some of these more still compositions, just kind of standing back and getting to look at a composition that has kind of happened suddenly. So it was really, I really enjoy that process of being an observer in the video work. And a lot of the long pauses and things that happen in the videos are really just me standing there looking, and then the moment my body, well, maybe in the chair piece and the pendulum dowel, like the only time that the video is cut is when my body enters the frame again. So the in-between times are really just the duration of my standing back and watching. So for me, that's very much tied to the experience of painting. Both making a painting, you're just kind of standing back and sitting and looking at your painting for so long. But also as the viewer, being able to kind of sit with a still image. Anyway, so I've kind of lost track a little bit here in your question. Yeah, sorry, I totally forget what you asked, Mattis.
I think that answered it. Maybe a more succinct question: do you see these as paintings or as video pieces? With the videos.
I think that's what I was trying to get at, but like documentation versus painting. and that's where I think these two live in a little bit of a different place than the other three, that are video documentation of paintings. And then these are moving into paintings. I mean, paintings can exist through digital screen. We you know, look at paintings most of the time through digital screens. So these can absolutely, I think, exist as paintings. But I'm still figuring that out. Don't quote me on that, because I think I'm still very much in a little bit of a, I like it, a confused state between what, like, yeah, the way something is framed within that space of video, I think really changes its function. And so I do think there's some different functions going on here across the 5 video pieces.
I did even start to think that these kind of become like sets, and then you're talking about performance and the body, and I'm like, what if it wasn't a video? What if it was live? Like, it could be like a whole thing.
Yeah, because of Luther, you know, mentioned the performativity of the works. Like I have kind of thought about the idea of like moving these compositions around like throughout the duration of an exhibition or things. But I think I don't think I would ever. For me, the documentation of that process removes it one step. It formalizes it and frames it in a way where it gets pushed back into kind of the painting language and less the performance.
Yes. And in a way, the edits of the video, are you editing yourself out each time?
Yeah, very intentionally. Yeah, and like the cut of those edits was important to me too. So it's not straight documentation, it's not completely truthful. The cut does bring a level of like, not trickery, but a disruption of true time. The video people here are probably like, there's ways to describe this that I'm not describing, but I'm trying to do it. So like the cut for me is like, it breaks the truth of the video and the linear narrative and like and kind of plays for me with more of like a painterly language of like of tricking and cutting and layering and obscuring, and like painting can really play with the truth of how you understand space and image in painting. So anyway, yeah. Sorry, Lisa, you had your hand up, or is there someone else at the back too?
I'm going to defer because it's just a comment.
Okay.
I'm thinking about a lot, you have a web, from our show, there's this web-based project that you have. It's a visual poetry that you've abstracted titles from famous painters, like male famous painters. And I'm really seeing the relationship of these specifically to that work. And then when I'm thinking about that, like this is more of a comment, but when I'm thinking about these pieces, and then I'm thinking, well, what is it abstracting? Like the result, what is it an abstraction of? And then I'm thinking, and it's your body. And then I'm thinking about your the paintings, and it's really interesting to think of that visual poetry. And I know that some people haven't seen that, but that visual poetry piece in relation to the paintings, and it's just it's expanding my your work.
I'm glad you kind of see the connection, because for me they're very similar in that the collaging of words is for me the same process of the collaging of disparate imagery, all in hopes of creating an alternative storyline or something. With the language, obviously, like story and narrative is more at the fore. I'm not so interested in narrative within the paintings, but there's something new, a new, continually a renewed field of space and form just through that combination of parts. And so for me, the language piece was very much like just a translation of image into words. So like the combination of words, creating a new, an alternative story.
Yeah, it gives me a whole larger breadth of your progress.
Thanks, Nicole. There.
And do it last question.
Sure, yeah.
I have two questions. One's sort of related to the videos, and then the other sort of related to this idea of horizon. But I look at these two paintings here and I think of them as paintings. Like for me, I like the process is there, and as a person who combines video and painting, I really enjoy these a lot. I'm particularly interested in this one in that I'm kind of curious about the process of how this one was made, because I think with this one it would be hard to kind of look at the phone and sort of see what you're doing. Were you able to look at the phone, or was this all like shot without you looking at the phone and editing later?
Yeah, I had no idea,
See, that's
what it looked, this is so, it's like, I probably shouldn't say, I don't know. I taped my phone to like the sprinkler system of the studio. And I was like climbing up there on a ladder and like heavy breathing on my phone, and the little sprinkler thing was right there, and I was like, oh no, I can't spend too much time up here trying to look at my phone screen because I'm gonna activate the sprinklers. Anyway, so I very much did not have a clear view of what was going on. I had marked out the perimeter.
okay.
So I had a good guess of where my hands were entering in.
Because I look at these and just think like the sense of composition is amazing. All of your work is kind of set up on this kind of grid format, or a lot of it, right? Where there's horizontals, strong verticals.
Yeah.
And as I'm watching these as you guys have been talking about the whole time,
Right.
it's been a pleasure to listen to you talk and
Okay.
watch these simultaneously. And just, yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I made sure to kind of mark out my frame on the floor, the perimeter of where I assumed the video was, the video view was reaching. But it was it was definitely like, I don't know what's actually being recorded here, or if my phone died or something. So it was kind of fun. They were all quite fun in that way, where I really was inventing as I was going.
Yeah. I guess the other question is, and I don't know if it's, right, the idea of horizon is kind of old now, but I feel like, you talked about gardening, and I just thought, in some ways I feel like there's something about horizon trees connected to all this. I don't know what it is yet, I'm just trying to figure it out.
Kind of like the
idea of like,
multiple pathways.
the idea of the roots underneath, but then they sprout up as different plants, and just kind of feel like there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of artists would relate to that as a kind of way to define, like but you only see it over time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm just coming to in my practice. Like, I finally kind of started to see over a certain amount of time what keeps sprouting up, which I used to think maybe was a random sprout. And now I'm understanding the rhizomatic maybe intersections, and that there is a kind of rhythm and cyclical nature behind it. It was like an observation that I think I'm just coming to as an artist in my practice. Yeah.
So I was also thinking about the perennial when I'm looking at the chair, how you drape it, people wrap trees and plants for the winter as they rest, and then you release them, and something magical happens in the spring. So that perennial idea comes to mind with that, and then the rocking is kind of like the soothing rain, the wine in the cycle of carnival with the plants.
Yeah, that's
nice.
nice.
I think it's beautiful.
For me,
Thank
the
you.
chair is sort of like a puppet.
Yeah. It's a kind of body of its own, it mimics our body. It's also like a studio staple, like everyone has to have a chair, a nice comfy chair in their studio. Everything here is kind of studio oriented too. Yeah. Anyway, well, I mean, maybe thank you so much, everybody. It's so nice to see you all.